Hey, Gracebased families. This is Megan Hunt. I'm here co-hosting this podcast for the next 8 episodes with Cody Kimmel, and we're talking about what grace-based parenting looks like in action. We're talking about connection and correcting our kids. I'm a mom of 6 myself. I'm from Ruston, Louisiana, and I'm a first grade teacher, a foster mom, and I'm a practitioner of TBRI, trust-based relational intervention. And all those things kind of help me to be able to figure out what parenting really looks like in times where kids are not obeying, we're frustrated, we're overwhelmed. What does grace-based families really look like in action? So if you identify with me in any of those ways, you need to listen to these episodes because they're going to give you a lot of hope and a lot of practical tools for parenting your kids with grace.
Welcome to the Gracebased Podcast. I'm Cody Kimmel. I'm the executive director of Gracebased, and I'm here with Megan Hunt. And we have been, if you have not been following along, this is our 7th episode talking about connection and correction, the realities of attachment, and all of the different things, practical tools of maintaining connection while we're trying to raise our kids. And this episode, we're getting into something that I think every parent talks about, thinks about, in many ways dreads, and that's kind of how do you shift to correction, really in kind of this idea of discipline and stuff like that. I want you to start talking about it in the context of the difference between punishment and discipline, because I think when I hear about it, and I will talk to other parents about it, and even see it in my own life, I think our gut reaction is that to train our kids well, we must punish them when they do something wrong. So talk a little bit about what is the real difference between punishment and discipline, and why does that matter?
Yeah, I think for us as parents, we need to think about what our goal is when we're correcting our kids.
Mm-hmm.
So is my goal to make them pay for what they did wrong, which is punishment, or is my goal to lead them to make a better choice in the future, which would be discipline? So for me, the word discipline reminds me of the word disciple, which means to follow after. And so when we're disciplining our kids, our goal is that we would be leading them in the right direction. And so with that, we're correcting them. We're pointing them in the right direction. Yeah. We're not trying to hurt them or get revenge or make them pay for what they did wrong. And so I think when we can think of our goal, the direction that we're wanting to go with our kids, it really helps us to see the difference between punishing somebody and discipling them, correcting them.
I mean, and I love that distinction. And I think it's really important for us, at least as we've talked about it even in the past, and with grace-based, we're very much so proponents of and can firmly say, like, punishment is not a part of the plan. Like, that is not something God calls us to as parents. And we can say that because when we look at the way God parents his kids, punishment is not part of his plan. If you're looking at even the logistics of it, is how is like justice paid for wrong, it's put through Christ so that his children can actually be brought into the family. The punishment's already been paid, the justice has already been sought, and the way God works with his children is through discipline. Is how do I help my children go from this point to a deeper form of sanctification? And so even though it, I think, rubs people the wrong way at first, and it kind of jars us a little bit, I think it's really important to say, like, the role of parents is to help discipline their kids, not to punish them.
Right. We are disciplined because God loves us, because he wants us to go in the right direction, because he knows how life works best. Yeah. And when I'm talking to my own kids, that's what I say. I discipline you because I love you, because I want you to know how life works best, and I want to point you in that right direction.
Yeah. And some of it, I mean, there's so much assumed in it that I think is important, even in just what you just said, like there is a love in discipline that sometimes is not always there in punishment. And there's a recognition of, I think, the nature of our kids and how they fit in. I think punishment is almost like there's this justice that has now been imbalanced, and we must balance the justice or balance the scales. But that's only if we understand their life and our family as something earned and not something given. If it's something earned, then maybe that logic makes sense. But we've talked so much about the fact that, like, what it means to be a family, and when you are parenting your children, they need to know, regardless of their behavior, that they are fully in your family, that they are fully a part of it. There's nothing that they can do to break that connection like we talked about. And punishment really works against those. So talk a little bit about just why punishment is so antithetical to the goals of what we're trying to do with our kids.
Yeah, I think when I think of punishment, it instantly to me brings about a sense of a focus on what I did wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously a punishment punitive, which creates shame and potentially fear.
Yeah.
And it also separates me from my parent, right? So
Yeah.
if I'm being punished for something I did wrong, the focus is less on my behavior and it's more on me.
Right.
Right. So we've talked about in the past that when we are disciplining our children, we're focusing on changing a behavior or changing a character quality that was seen through a behavior. We are focused with punishment on like just shaming and telling someone that they are wrong.
Yeah.
And so we're not able to separate the behavior from the child. And a lot of times a child is not able to understand that what I did was wrong, but I am not wrong.
Yeah.
And so that big distinction is really huge, as when we talk about punishing a child, we're punishing, a lot of times we say we're punishing their behavior, but that's not always understood. And it doesn't create a sense of safety for a child to be able to make a mistake again. It makes me instead be afraid, right?
Yeah.
I'm afraid I don't want to do anything wrong, especially if I really desperately want to please my parent.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it can close my heart off to growth. I can just say like, well, I'm bad, I'm wrong, rather than open me up to continue to learn and grow.
Yeah.
And so what we don't want to do is shut our kids down.
Right.
We want them to continue to trust us and walk with us because we want them to continue growing.
Yeah.
So punishment is not the way we want to go. Instead, we want to go towards discipline, which has a different motive and a different aim and a different focus.
Yeah. I mean, I even think about like biblically, you look at God's relationship with Israel in the Old Testament and the promises he made, and you look at what the prophets are saying to Israel, and even just the choices that Israel made. Like, I mean, there was a lot of bad choices, you know, but even as God speaks through the prophets to them, there's still this recurring theme of like, you are still my people. Like, I am still your God. You are still my people. And, you know, there's, regardless of that behavior, there was not this like constant separation. And I loved the distinction between behavior and identity. Can you just dig into that a little bit more? What does that mean?
Yeah. I think that we a lot of times internalize that we are what we do. And we know, biblically speaking, that that's simply not true.
Right.
If that was true, we would have no hope, right? Because we're all sinful. We are all like completely flawed. But I think when we can separate what I am with who I am, it really allows us hope to continue to maintain a sense of dignity and purpose. And a sense that we're loved. And then it allows us to focus on what needs to be changed specifically. And so when we're talking about our children, I think that's just a very important distinction to make specifically and explicitly to them, to tell them, when you did this, I didn't like this thing that you did.
Yeah.
And we were talking earlier in a different episode about being specific about saying what you did in this moment is not in line with who you are. Not in line with your character.
Yeah.
And so even pointing out that that's not in line with yourself, because I believe you are responsible. You are honest. You are kind. But when you acted in this moment, it wasn't in alignment with who you are. Yeah. And so we need to do that a different way. And there's a lot of ways that we can coach and correct our kids in gentle, gracious ways that steps outside of punishment into discipline.
Yeah. And what I love about that is, whereas punishment can kind of short circuit growth, break connection, send kids into shame, and really even probably communicate a thing that we ourselves are not actually wanting to communicate, that we are kind of unwittingly maybe defining them in a way that if we knew better or thought about it more, would never want to do. What I love about it is with discipline, not only are you helping to address the behavior and hopefully move past that, but you're getting an opportunity to speak really good identity into your kids. It's almost like a moment where it's a jarring moment where they're going to be receptive and paying attention to what you're going to say. And if what you can say is in that moment, hey, I know that you are kind, even though you just hit your sister.
Yeah.
That's
right.
And I know that you are honest, even though you just lied about that. Or I know that you did this. Or I know that you are this.
Yeah.
I mean, how much more receptive to that and how much more connecting that is and forming that is
That's right.
in those critical moments.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think that's totally true.
So with that said, what can discipline look like? What is a gentle way to, I guess, correct a child? Because the reality that we have also, and we don't want to like downplay this, sometimes behaviors, like we're talking about maybe like funny or cute behaviors, like sometimes behaviors can be really, really rough and highly disruptive, incredibly not okay. So talk about, even in those extreme circumstances, what are some gentle ways to do that? What are some discipline-oriented ways, even when things feel like they're on fire?
We know I'm a mom of 6. I've got kids that range from 2 all the way to 20. So I've seen some stuff.
Yes.
And we have had some really significant behaviors in our home that have really put my feet to the fire of like, what do I believe in those moments about how we're going to turn behavior around?
Yeah.
And I think the foundation of what I believe is that a child is not their behavior, like we just talked about, and that every misbehavior is a communication. So every time someone is doing something that is misbehaving, it's communicating something to me. And I am responsible for figuring out what that behavior is communicating to me and then meeting that need. So I'm going to try to see the need and meet that need. Now, sometimes those behaviors are not rooted in a need. Sometimes they are. Sometimes I have a kid that is melting down and losing it, and it's like they're starving or they didn't get a nap. And I have to recognize this meltdown is less because they're trying to be difficult and more because they have a need that's not being met. And then secondly, I want to be gracious with them to teach them what the right thing is for them to do. So I'm a teacher, so naturally that makes sense to me, right?
Yeah.
Is that in order to point someone in the way that they need to go, I need to show them the way.
Yeah.
I need to not only say, stop doing what you're doing, but start doing this thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's the piece that parents can add that will help them to be more successful.
Yeah.
Not only to stop the misbehavior that's happening currently, but then in the future for that not to keep happening again in a cycle again and again.
Yeah.
And so what I like to do is reduce is my number one best way about how to redirect a behavior. So give an opportunity.
Tell me what a redo is.
It's just what it sounds like, right? It's the opportunity to give someone to try it again without punishment, right? So I will say, like, maybe let's try that again. Stop, let's try that again.
Yeah.
And I'll ask the child to do it again. Now, sometimes a child might not know what to do. So if a kid sasses me and I said, like, it's time, like, go upstairs, please, and get your homework and bring it down. And they say, I'm not going to do that. My first response might be like, whoa, let's try that again with respect. And if the child says it again or says something else disrespectful, I have to think to myself, maybe they don't know what I need. So I might say something like, you can say, all right, I'll be right down. Or you could say something like, can I get it in 1 minute?
Yeah.
I'm going to give them words that are okay for them to do.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to wait while they do it back again. So in that instance, I might say like, oh, let's try that again with respect. Pause. My child might say like, okay, yes, ma'am, I'll go get it. Okay, problem solved.
Yep.
It doesn't require me going further than that.
Yeah. And that's what I think is so important to hear. Like the redo, because I think parents, and I don't, maybe it's that we are like afraid that we're not doing enough to correct behavior, or we're like, I don't want my kids to turn out to be monsters when they grow up. And so we have to be firm. We have to have this stuff, that they will fear that a redo is not a sufficient enough discipline.
Well, I think sometimes some people might say like, don't say it like that, be respectful. That's not a redo. A redo is actually asking the person to go back and reenact and say the correct words or do the correct actions to sufficiency.
Yeah.
So it's creating a new neural pathway in the brain. So it's not just telling them like, stop that, which would be pretty permissive. And that could lead to us not having kids that turn out the right way if we just tell them like, oh, don't do that.
Yeah.
Try that again. But actually making them go back and do it again and then having them use the words that are
Yeah.
correct and appropriate, or do the things that are correct and appropriate. So trying things again it's action-based and it's leveled at the specific behavior.
Yeah.
And so when we're asking someone to do something again, we're sure that we're down on their level, that they know that we're talking to them, and that we're specific about what they need to do again and how they need to do it again. And so I use redos in my house all the time. And I would say 90% of the time, I don't have to go beyond that when I'm correcting a behavior.
Yeah.
Even with a toddler or a teenager.
Yeah.
If I'm asking them to do something again, it might be speaking with respect. It might be something like even like a kid slamming their door on the way. I might open the door back up and be like, hey, that door slam was kind of aggressive. Can you try that again, please?
Yeah.
And then the child would come back and like close it. And sometimes they'll slam it again. I mean, it doesn't always work the first time. Yeah, you know.
Oh, no,
so
I know.
I'll open it back up and say, okay, what's really going on here?
Yeah.
If they're not able to do that redo and it doesn't just kind of click in, I think there might be something else. That behavior is communicating something else.
Right.
So the door slam from my teenager might be like, I'm actually really frustrated with you because you told me I couldn't go out with my friends.
Yeah.
And so it gives me an opportunity to do some more coaching and some more disciplining, rather than just fussing about the door slamming. Because so much of the time, that behavior that we see it's communicating something to us, but it's about something that's a lot deeper.
Yes.
And so if I can stop worrying about what happens after this behavior, like what's my response going to be? What's the consequence going to be?
Yes.
Then this is just a totally new way of thinking about things. And what I'm not saying is that every misbehavior can just be fixed by a redo.
Right.
It can't.
Yeah.
A lot of misbehavior requires a consequence in order to teach.
Yeah.
It means it's kind of, I think of like when I'm speeding, right? Like if I have a little bit of a lead foot, I'm not going to lie. So, and I live in a small town, so I have to be careful because these same police officers, they know me.
Yeah.
So I have to be careful because they're like,
Megan, come on over here again.
I already gave you a warning, lady.
Yeah.
But like the warning is kind of like hey, you need to slow down next time. So usually that works. But if it doesn't work and I'm speeding down the very same road that I sped down yesterday, they're going to give me a consequence because the warning didn't work. The redo didn't work. It wasn't effective to change my behavior. So how we'll know if a redo works is if the behavior is changed. That's the first thing. And then if we're content with the way that it ended, with the child and us are both content and we're both like, okay, nobody's mad still. And then the last one is that we remain connected. So we're okay after we interchange with that. So there's a lot of examples that we can talk about how a redo is used. We're going to talk a lot more about that I know in the next episode.
Right.
But thinking about that as a framework is a really good gentle way for correction. And another one I kind of want to talk about here is using choice as a way to correct. So this is kind of one that I think is really gracious and gentle, rather than if I do need a consequence for a child. Let's say they had a bad attitude in a car trip. This is an example that a friend of mine just brought up to me, that we were in a car trip. We were planning to stop at a gas station and get slushies for everybody. And I said, everyone needs to behave and be kind in the car, and then we will get slushies. And if you are not kind, then you'll have a consequence. Well, after several opportunities to be kind, this child still was not. And it was evident to me she was going to need a consequence. When I don't know the consequence, what it needs to be right away, I often say, you will have a consequence. I'll let you know what it is later. And that gives me time to think before I overpromise. And so in that instance, and in a lot of other instances in my life, rather than her consequence being you don't get a slushie, which would have
other consequences for everybody.
We would have all paid for that. I decided I was going to take away her choice about what kind of slushie that she got.
Yeah.
And so when we got there, I said, darling, I want to talk to you. And I pulled her over and I said, you have been disrespectful in the car and ugly, and you did not change your attitude when I gave you an opportunity to redo it. And so you have a consequence, and the consequence is that you have to have a strawberry slushie at the gas station. She about lost her mind. Now, strawberry is what she would have picked. She liked it. But I simply took away her choice as the consequence. And that is something that can be used as a really gentle yet effective correction tool. I don't have to take away something tangible. I don't have to ground you for 2 weeks, but I take away something that I already gave you. I already shared that power with you, and then I'm taking it back.
Yeah. No, I love that, because I think the mistake that will happen oftentimes when you do get to the point where you have to give a consequence is either it's too ambiguous and you're like, well, you're going to be in trouble, and nothing happens, which is not helpful, because that actually communicates a lack of trust and all that stuff. Or the consequence is so much worse than it really needed to be.
Yes. Because you really want to hit it home.
Yeah, because you're like, I don't want this to ever happen again. Yeah. You're never going to be disrespectful in the car ever again.
Here's the problem that happens to me is that in the same time, if I say, okay, you lose this phone for 2 weeks, teenager, well, in that 2 weeks' time, the teenager gets in trouble again and needs another consequence. Oh, and then what do you do? You have nothing to take away because you already took it away.
You have to field their social life for 2 weeks. I'm like, I don't want to do that. That's why I gave you the phone in the first place.
That's right.
And so I think what's nice is it gives parents an option of saying it can be a consequence that they will feel, because there is a gift in that. That if there's not maybe a natural consequence already embedded, which for me is one of my favorite ones, where it's like,
praise God for those.
This is the thing that will happen as a result of your choice. I'm going to let that happen to you.
That's right. And that is hard as a parent to allow some of those natural consequences, especially when it really puts a damper on your plans. I had a child that we were all going to go jump at a trampoline park, and everyone had brought their little trampoline socks. And I had said again and again, go get your socks, go get your socks. Well, this person just had not. Well, we show up and they don't have any socks and they can't jump. And you know what happened? They didn't have any more socks to sell us. So that poor friend, and I wasn't even
wanting to.
No, this poor child's crying and crying. That was enough of a consequence. He knew I didn't need to heap onto it, but it was a natural consequence. That because, And, one other thing that I think is a really great way to respond to kids when they are really not making good choices is to draw them close to you. So rather than saying, you are in trouble, go to your room. The exact opposite. You are having a really hard time making choices that are good. I need you to be closer to me so I can help you. Because you need a lot more. It's obvious to me that you need a lot more support. So that is really wildly unpopular with mostly everybody, but teenagers especially don't like that. But using proximity, and it does shift your mindset, because you're thinking, I need this child to be close to me, because they really do need me to be able to correct them a little bit. I use it in my classroom. Kids are working all around the room. If they're not following directions, doing what they need to do, then I just say, you know what, actually, you come and work. Your station is going to be right by Mrs. Hunt. You're going to be right here. And it helps me to be able to see them, build a connection, and restore. And then we can actually have some conversations about why that misbehavior was happening. So it serves for a lot of purposes when you draw them to you rather than send them away.
Well, and it speaks a little bit to even that idea of every misbehavior is a form of communication. And, what I will see oftentimes is a lot of what's underneath misbehavior is a valid felt need that they are just not mature enough to really handle the right way.
Or maybe the bar's too high. Maybe that's too much of them.
Or, I'll feel it a lot when things have gotten really busy or something like that. And particularly, I guess all of them will maybe start misbehaving, talking back more than they normally would, things like that. And what's interesting is kind of that idea of pulling him in. You start pulling him in. One of my favorite things to do is if I'm having to make food, just have him help me. Or if I'm having to go somewhere, just say, hey, now you're coming with me to do that. And what's really interesting is what it shows in those moments is probably the deeper need is they're probably maybe feeling almost a little disconnected to you. And so some of their misbehavior is actually just, hey, I'd like you to pay attention to me. I'd like but I don't really know how to ask it. I don't know how to go about it. And so even that can help find that, what is the legitimate thing that is driving this misbehavior.
Sure. And I think some parents might think well, that's just coddling them. And that's just been okay, you do something, you hit somebody, you come stand by me. And that's not the spirit of what we're talking about at all.
No.
But we do need to figure out why are they hitting? in
Oh,
the
yeah.
first place. And sometimes I really can't figure that out unless they are near to me.
Yep.
And I think we want to be, we want to connect the coaching
Yeah.
with the behavior, but we don't need to be so quick. I don't think as parents we need to panic and be like,
Right.
I need to give you a punishment now.
Yep.
A lot of my success has been in deferring consequences so that I can be wise and so that I can be calm also.
Yep.
So if I can defer and say, you know what, I don't know, we're going to really need to work on this. I'm not sure. There needs to be a consequence, but I'm not sure what it is right now. I want to be really wise about this.
Yeah.
I'll get back with you later.
Oh, I love that, because I think parents almost need that permission, because I will say what will happen oftentimes is if we do it in the moment and we haven't had time to think it through, usually the consequence is not the right consequence.
Yeah, it's too harsh. It's not reasonable.
Unattainable.
Yeah, like you're losing TV for
Christmas
a whole
is
month.
gone.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, what did I get myself into?
Yeah.
And being thoughtful about it, practicing that pause, I think gives us the opportunity to be really, really wise with our words and to think too, what is the purpose for this? Like, what is my purpose in disciplining this child? Where am I trying to go? And how am I going to best get there? And that is answered differently with different kids. The idea of being gentle with our discipline is so important. And I define that as like only using as much force that's necessary. So if I were to put a ping pong ball on this table, I could like really like hit it with a tennis racket or a baseball bat and it would go flying. But I could also like just flick it with my tiny finger and it would move.
Yeah.
And I think of with disciplining our kids, we don't need to overcorrect or overdo it. We need to just use the amount of force that's necessary in order to get that behavior to change.
Yeah.
So for one of my daughters, all I have to do is say like, oh, honey, that was very rude. You need to try that again with respect. She will break down and lose it. That is all I need to do. For others of my children, I might have to be very close and say, that was not respectful.
Yeah.
This is what you need to say. Try it again. And they might try it again and again and not get it right. And we have to level up and give a consequence.
Yeah.
So it just depends. But I don't need to use firmness with a child that only needs a little bit of redirection. I need to make sure my response matches the misbehavior. And then it will get corrected. And that's what will maintain that connection.
Totally.
That if we don't do that, then we run the risk of being too firm and fracturing our relationship with our child.
Well, it goes back even to something we talked about kind of near the beginning about this attunement to our kids. And I think that's especially for parents who maybe have multiple kids. Like I know for me, what will work as a really effective discipline or consequence or something like that with one of my kids is really not effective for another one. And some of them kind of need a little bit more deliberateness, firmness, like, hey, if you do this, this is what will happen and all that stuff. Some of them, it's just like, kind of like what you said, hey, even just recognizing that was out of line is enough to break them down and stuff like that. And some of them might need a little space to cool down. Some of them might need to come in close. And being attuned to your kids through those connections sets you up better to even be able to navigate the differences between the two.
Yeah. Well, and I think as parents too, just like recognizing which behaviors you have or which correcting behaviors you have right now that are not serving you well and being willing to reevaluate and release the ones that are not working.
Yeah.
Like look at your family life and this is what we did, saying like, okay, what is not working?
Yeah.
What does not work for us? And we have learned really quickly certain things. It's like, we can try that. It has never been effective. Screaming at people, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Just save your breath. It doesn't ever, all it does is escalate people.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
And so just looking at like, okay, what do we usually do when someone misbehaves? And some parents will be like, I don't know, we don't have a clear plan.
Yeah.
And so thinking through.
That can be a hard challenge.
And that's a hard challenge too, because then you're left to what you feel.
Yeah. And the kid doesn't know what to expect or anything like that. So that creates uncertainty.
And so I think if we can just say like, I need to release the practices that I currently hold that are not serving me well and decide that I want to help my kids train their brain to behave better. And we know that the best way to do that is through practice, through explicit teaching and coaching, and through relationship. And so that's what we want to offer to our kids.
Well, and I think that speaks a little bit to how this balances out with this idea of grace. throughout the as my dad would write and speak, and I've been a part of that and seeing that, one of the common questions that will come up is like, well, how does grace and discipline work? Like, or how does grace not just be permissive or give license to just all this stuff? Let's talk a little bit about how grace and boundaries are actually like part of each other, that it is a gracious thing to hold to firm boundaries when we need to hold firm to them.
Yeah. I mean, I think we talk about boundaries a lot with our kids in terms of fire. We live out in North Louisiana in the country. And so it's not uncommon for us to have fires out on our property. Mm-hmm. And we talk about like what would happen if we just let the fire go anywhere.
Right.
And the kids know like, oh, that'd be terrible. It'd burn down everything.
Yeah.
And we have had a fire one time on our property that kind of got out. And it was a perfect example for us to show the value of putting a boundary. You know, when you're setting a fire, you do the water ring, you can do the rocks, you watch it, you're careful because it helps. Fire is good for a purpose within a boundary. But when it's let out, it can be very destructive. And that's the same thing with a lot of things in our own lives.
Yeah.
And so that can be a way that we can express to our kids that we need boundaries in order to thrive. Everything is not good for us at all times. Although everything is permissible, it's not always beneficial.
Yeah.
And so I think showing grace to kids is telling them what is going to be wise, how life works best. That's the phrase we use a lot of times with our kids is, this is just how life is going to work best. And we want to teach our kids to have self-control. So right now we are the boundary for them. So that is what discipline is. As parents are being boundaries for our kids. We're showing them the way to go and how far to go. And when they've gone too far, we're the ones saying like, uh-oh, that was too much, rein it back in, fix it. But our hope is that we would be able to let go of that. And as they get to be young teenagers, they should be able to do that on their own so that when they get to be adults, they will have self-control and they will be able to create boundaries for themselves that are healthy, that not only protect other people, but protect them and the way that the life that God has designed for them to lead.
Yeah. And I think so much like grace is a gift that I think God gives us. And this is something especially with my older kids now, when, we're able to actually have genuine, like deeper conversations about it. It's not just like practical, like, hey, don't do this. Like they're wanting to know, why shouldn't I do this? A lot of that conversation then actually opens it up to saying like, hey, the reason why I don't want you to act like this or why we should shift this behavior or the way you're going about this is, if you were to play this out and continue in this behavior, what would this look like at a job? What would this look like in school? What would this look like in your friends? What would this look like with your spouse or something like that? If we can't grow beyond this behavior now, right now, the consequence is you have to have this conversation with me and you might be delayed in something or might not have a choice or something like that with something like that later. If this doesn't change and you get to later in life, the consequences could be significantly more. And so it's actually a gift to give you this boundary, to discipline you through this. For me, like I have learned over time as a parent to treasure discipline moments and treasure moments.
That's the
where
gold
I get to
right
correct
there.
them.
That's
because
the parenting
for
gold.
me, I know that in those moments, God is getting to work through me in their life to kind of form them into more alive humans in Him.
Yeah, and I think if we frame it like that we see like, okay, my kid is throwing an absolute meltdown in the grocery store because he wants these M&Ms. If I say to myself, this is okay, it's go time. Now's my opportunity.
Yeah.
I get to, rather than like, oh my gosh, they're embarrassing me. What am I going to do? We look forward to those because that is the moment.
Yes.
That is the parenting moment. So rather than thinking parenting is just making dinner and putting kids in pajamas, but like the moments that I get to form them are those moments when they're going the wrong way, that I get to pull them back the right way. It really gets to be kind of almost like it's a privilege. Like, okay, and I'm ready for this. I'm expecting my kids to go the wrong way.
Yes.
It's not that like, oh, why are you melting down about M&Ms? I'm like, okay, I knew you were, you're a sinner.
This was bound to happen. Yes.
This is a sinner who's going to be in a sinful moment at some point. And now is my opportunity. And I have a plan and I'm prepared to offer them gracious boundaries so that they can continue to grow.
Now, one thing, and I love that idea of gracious boundaries. One thing that I think can happen is we will maybe say the right things, but say them in the wrong way. Let's say this is something I've had to learn quite a bit, because I will look back on what I said. I'm like, well, nothing that I said was wrong, but clearly this didn't have the same effect. Didn't feel right and stuff like that. And so in the midst of this idea of like correcting and discipline, we're not punishing, but we are gently trying to move them forward beyond the behavior into something better. How does tone, how does language affect that? Because I know for me, even if I'm not raising my voice or something like that, there's definitely a way to say something that works and a way to say something that doesn't work.
Well, kids are especially attuned to all the body language, the tone, the facial expression, even how loud your voice is really speaks something. And we all are. But and for me, I've got 3 kids that have come from hard places that have joined my family through adoption or foster care. And those kids especially are excellent at knowing, like almost before I say anything, that I'm upset with them or that something is going to go down. And so I have to be especially careful about what I'm trying to communicate. Because if I'm not intentional, I can communicate something that is not right or doesn't reflect my heart overall. It might be what I feel in the moment. And I'm going to be honest, I have been guilty of saying some really terrible things that I wish I could take back.
Same here.
That I can't undo. And that I wish I would have taken a moment to pull myself together before I decided to correct. And I was a single mom for a long time. I met my husband when my son was 5. And so in those moments before I was married, I really especially had to take a moment and pull myself together. Now, as parenting with a spouse, I can tag team and say, like, I'm not good. Or he will say, you're not good. You need to take a second. So I think that's my first piece of advice, is to make sure that we're in the mindset that we are in control of our volume, our voice, and our words. And if we're not, then we're not ready to be a coach, right? It's like a first base coach that's throwing a fit, yelling at the umpire. He's not watching what's happening at his base, and he's not able to be in a thinking place. And so just like that, if I think of myself like a coach, I need to be ready to think. And so with that, knowing that the volume, the cadence, and the tone of my voice all communicate different things, right? If my voice is loud, it communicates power and intensity and intention. If it's quiet, it can communicate gentleness. But even with what I'm saying, I can still use the volume of my voice to communicate a message. I can also use how fast I'm speaking is really important. And what I'm saying, of course, is extremely important. So in times that I feel especially intense, I want to be intentional about slowing down and lowering all of those things. I want to speak softer and slower on purpose, especially because if my child is escalated, chances are they're not able to process things as quickly as normal, right? If you're being flooded with cortisol, you're all stressed, you're not able to notice you're not able to process it as quickly. And I need to slow down. I need to be more calm. And then it's interesting that naturally the person you're talking to will typically calm their voice down as well. So they tend to match you. So that's good wisdom when you've got somebody that's upset.
Yes. Well, and I think it's, on top of all that, I think it's also worth mentioning we will also do it wrong sometimes. And the beauty of that is even if we're doing this wrong, we can come back later with the right tone, seek forgiveness, own our own mistakes, say like, hey, I was completely out of line. And I've had to say this so many times, like, hey, what I said isn't in line with what I feel. how I said it wasn't right.
Yeah.
It was not, you don't deserve that from me, and I'm really sorry. Will you forgive me?
And that's offering yourself grace too,
Oh, yeah.
right? That's offering ourselves grace as parents, knowing we are going to make mistakes, but we need to be able to acknowledge those so that we can learn and grow. We're almost discipling ourselves to be better parents by identifying, rather than like burying our head in the sand and saying like, well, that was terrible. By saying like, okay, what specifically did I do wrong? And for me, it's always too harsh. My tone is always too harsh. And I can see it the moment I say something harshly. I can see it on my children's faces. I can see that I crushed them when that's not what I intended to do. I did not mean to be so sharp with my tone and my words. And so I can stop. And there's so many times that I just say, was that? And you can see my kids' eyes start to well up with tears. And I'm like, oh gosh, I pushed too hard. I say like, was mommy too harsh? And they're like, yes. I'm like, I'm so sorry. And then I have to offer myself grace. Like because God is not that way with me. And I want to be in line with how he treats me, but I know that I don't have the capacity without the Holy Spirit enabling me to do that. And so I have to continually reach out to God and say like, I need you. My natural response is not going to be right. I am not strong enough, especially in these moments with, discipling and disciplining my kids. Like, I am going to mess up. I need you to help me. And sometimes even just pausing and saying that out loud, like, Lord, I need you right now. I am going to mess this up. I feel it. And he's always been really faithful to meet me there. And then it puts me in a posture of humility where I know it just refocuses on what I'm doing.
Hey, this is Greg from Pasadena, California. Gracebased make free resources for parents thanks to the generosity of listeners like you. To join in the work of transforming generations of families, go to gracebased.com/join.